he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. Kind of what he was trying to do in the beginning, right? He was trying to do that when he heard about John the Baptist, but the crowds wouldn't let him. But now he's able to get off to himself and find a quiet place just to pray, to be with his God. When evening came, he was there alone with the boat by this time. So he sent them off, and it's been a while, by the way. It's been a number of hours. He sent them off, and the boat is already it's a long way off from the land. But there's a problem. There's a problem. That is, they should have gotten to the other side by now. But they're not, because they're in the midst of waves and wind, and they can't get it. It's just beating against them, so they can't make any progress. And so in the fourth watch of the night, which means it's around 3 o'clock in the morning, what we're told is that Jesus came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they're terrified. And they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Now, to understand why, where they were coming from, you see, it was an understanding in the ancient world, in the first century especially, that the sea, there was evil. There was evil out in the middle of the sea, and people were afraid of it. And so when out comes in the middle of the storm, Jesus walking, they think it's a ghost, some evil, something's come to destroy them, because something's come to do them harm. And so they're terrified. They said it was a ghost. But immediately, Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it's I. Don't be afraid." And that's the end of the first section of Jesus walking out. And it ends with compassion from Jesus, doesn't it? They're afraid, they're terrified, and yet Jesus answers them with compassion. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And you know what Jesus is saying in this moment? He's very purposely taking us back to the burning bush. He's taking us back to where God, Yahweh himself in the Old Testament, declared, "I am," about himself. Jesus says, "It is I. I'm the one who's got the power over heaven and earth. I'm the one who has the power to calm the storm. Take heart. Don't be afraid." And so that ends with the first section, the first act of this scene that this play that we're given this morning. And it takes us to the next point. And the next point is Peter's journey of faith. And Peter, we're told, then answers, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." Now notice something interesting here. You know, some people maybe you've heard this text taught or preached before, saying sometimes we're commanded to get out of the boat, right? Sometimes we're commanded by God to get out of the boat and take a risk. We hear that sometimes, right? Well, in fact, I'd heard that recently. Well, notice what really happens here. Jesus didn't command him. Peter asked him to. This was Peter's idea. This wasn't Jesus. Peter wanted to come out. He's saying, "If it is you, command me and I'll come out." So Jesus says, "Come." Come. There's nothing more than that. Come. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water and he came to Jesus. All's well, right? It's what he wanted. Peter got just what he wanted. When he was doing it, he was walking. But then something changed. And this is what changed. When he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." So what changed? See, he asked Jesus. He's the one who made the request. "Command me to come." Jesus says, "Come." And at first, all's well. But then something changed. Well, he took his eyes off of Jesus, right? He took his eyes off of the one who had commanded him, the one who had power, the one who could actually do this miraculous work. And he turned instead to the wind. He turned instead to the circumstances, all the bad stuff that was raging around him, right? And when he turned his attention to those things that were going on, he started sinking. He started sinking. But that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. See, as he started sinking, what we're told is he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus, for the second time, we're told immediately. Did you see? I always tell folks, when you hear something in a passage repeated twice, take notice. This is important. If it's third, then you really, really should pay attention. If it's not 3 times, but this twice, the second time we're told immediately. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." You see, that's the real answer to this. The question began last week, if we read the text, of who is this Jesus? Who is this guy who can feed all these people, who can do these miracles? Who's this guy who can walk out on water? Who is this guy who can command the seas to cease, the winds to cease? Who's got this power? And the answer comes right there at the end of this section in 33. Those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." But as I said before, this passage that we read this morning, it's not just a nice story. It's not just a nice account of some people, and it's not just a story that tells us some about Jesus. Of course, it does tell us quite a lot about Jesus. But that's not what it's only about. See, this text that we just read, it demands something from us. It demands something of us. And as I said in the beginning, what it demands from us, God's demand on us, is complete and total faithfulness to Him. And He will settle for nothing less. God's demand is complete and total faithfulness. See, what we see in Peter is that Peter doubts, right? Jesus said as much. And when he took his eyes off Jesus and began to look at other things and the circumstances and the wind, he began to doubt what happened. He sunk. He began to sink. Peter doubted and he sank. See, the idea of faith that we're talking about here, this faith that God demands, this faith that Peter had at first and then lacked as he began to sink, this faith that means to trust God with our lives. It doesn't mean just to believe in Him. It doesn't mean just to have a head knowledge of who He is. That's part of it. It all works in. It means to go beyond that, take the next step. Not only just to believe and to know in your mind for it to be true, but to actually take the next step and say, all right, I'll put my life in your hands. Is that not what Peter was doing? Peter got out of the boat. He put faith in Jesus, but then circumstances changed, and he began to doubt. His time, what happened to him, changed as well, and he began to sink. You see, this demand of faith, this trusting faith of Jesus doesn't, or God doesn't just want us to know who He is and to believe Him. He wants us to trust Him with our lives, and this has always been the case. When we look at Psalm 55, the psalmist declares, God declares through the psalmist, "Gather to me my faithful ones." See, God's always looking for faithful ones, those who put their trust in Him completely and totally. And then in Habakkuk 2:4, which actually the Apostle Paul quotes later in Romans chapter 1, "The righteous shall live by faith." And you know what that means? That means those who are right with God, those who are in a good relationship with God, those who are in the right place with Him, where they should be, where He wants them, those are the people who live by faith. Those are the people who trust Him with their lives. Don't just believe Him in their minds. They actually trust Him, handing over the reins to God. That's what He demands. To be right with God. To be in a right relationship with Him. It actually demands total and complete faithfulness in Him. There aren't any exceptions. It requires total and complete faith in Him. But you know what our story, this account of Peter, also tells us this morning? It tells us, well, while that might be the demand on our lives, this complete and total faithfulness in Him, if we can learn anything from Peter, it's that we fail. We fail to live up to what God demands, what God requires. The righteous shall live by faith, complete and total faith. Well, look at Peter. Peter had faith, right? He had faith in that moment. He trusted Jesus with his life. He said, all right, command me to come, and I'll do it. Jesus commanded, and He came. Then something happened. That faith turned on a moment, didn't it? It turned, it changed. And you know what changed it was the circumstances in his life. What he was going through in that moment. The winds, the fear, it all came crashing into his life, and the doubts came, and he started to sink. Was that total and complete faithfulness? No. It wasn't. See, Peter failed. Peter failed. Peter took his eyes off Jesus, and he sunk. And Jesus says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" See, if the demand on us is for complete and total faithfulness, if Peter couldn't do it, Peter who was with Jesus, what hope is there for us? What hope is there for us who certainly, do we not fail? Do we not fail to show God total and complete faithfulness? I know I do. I don't at all times show God the faithfulness and the trust that He demands. I don't. I take my eyes off it. Circumstances change. Things get hard. Things don't turn out the way that I hoped they would. And I begin to doubt. And I become just like Peter, sinking in the midst of my circumstances. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is this. This passage, what it demands of us, and what it tells us about God's demand for faithfulness, total and complete. This account is actually more about grace than it is about faith. This passage is actually more about grace than it is about faith. You see, the Apostle Paul said this in Ephesians 2, verse 8. If you don't know it, I hope that you memorize it. For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith. For it is by grace that you've been saved through faith. See, it was by grace that Jesus responded to Peter's cry for salvation. See, when Peter began to doubt, when his faith proved not to be perfect, not to be complete, not to be total of what God demanded, when he began to sink in it because of his circumstances, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And we're told immediately Jesus reached out his hand and pulled him up. Immediately. See, when Peter was in the midst of doubt, far from perfect faith, Jesus saved him. See, it's not saved by faith through grace. It's saved by grace through faith. See, faith can very easily, if we turn it around, can become a work or a law. And that's not what it's about at all. Faith is just the vehicle that gets us there. Romans 5:2, the Apostle Paul said this, "Through Jesus we have obtained access by faith into His grace, in which we stand and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God." See, the demand on us, the demand that God has is real, and it's good, and it's right. God's demand for total and complete faithfulness to Him. But it's a demand that we cannot live up to. None of us. For no one is righteous. No one seeks after God, we're told. No one has that kind of faith. We doubt, just like Peter, we fail. Our faith, like Peter's, it's imperfect. But thanks be to God that we have a Savior who is and always has been faithful, who's always lived up to the demand, who never doubted, who never gave in. Jesus has complied fully with God's demand for complete and total faithfulness. So that when our faith proves to be too small, when our faith proves to be imperfect, when we cry out to Jesus, "Lord, save me," by grace He immediately reaches out His hand and takes hold of our lives. Friends, this passage for us this morning is about grace. It's about God's grace and mercy and love for us in His Son, Jesus Christ. See, Jesus, if we learn anything from this passage, is ready and eager to save. He longs to reach into our lives and pull us up. All we have to do is to cry out to Him for our salvation. Let's pray. Lord God, we admit that the demand for faithfulness is more than we can bear. For if we're willing to be honest with you at all, we're not faithful all the time. Not completely. Not totally. We might, like Peter, believe you for a minute, trust you for a minute when things are looking good. Or maybe we're having a mountaintop experience. But then life gets hard. Things change. Circumstances change. As things get harder and we take our eyes off of you, we begin to trust in other things and other people, and we start to sink. But thank you that by your grace and mercy and love, as when we cry out to you to save us, that you are right there immediately to reach out pull us out and draw us back to yourself, to your throne of grace, where we might find help in our time of need. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your mercy, Jesus. Thank you for your love. Amen. Will you please stand now as we proclaim our faith in Christ in the words of the Nicene Creed?